More skyscrapers can be found in New York than in Beijing, Seoul, and Toronto put together. The Big Apple really has fewer buildings than Shenzhen and Hong Kong. You could say that Manhattan is filled of them, or that it is overflowing with them. This makes it particularly difficult to construct new developments, necessitating ever more inventive solutions to more ambiguous land parcels. We have witnessed extremely thin skyscrapers, and skyscrapers constructed atop pre-existing skyscrapers. Over protected areas of the city, buildings have been erected on stilts. However, this is unlike anything we've ever seen. They created a single structure and an engineering nightmare by bending the skyscrapers together in the center. What keeps these structures from collapsing? Look at this Skybridge. It does, in fact, move. There are many iconic, eye-catching silhouettes in New York's skyline that are either entirely avant-garde or must-see. The American Copper Building is located here. It offered an eye-catching new addition and immediately gained notoriety for one amazing engineering secret that keeps it upright. In addition to its stark appearance as two standard towers bend to the hip and lean into one another. However, we must first examine the limitations that made this building's peculiar shape necessary before revealing how that is achievable. As much as we would like to believe that skyscrapers are only works of art, massive sculptures that adorn our skylines and serve as symbols for their cities, they are, first and foremost, innovations in business. In Manhattan, a square foot of land typically costs $2,580. This makes it, along with Monaco and Hong Kong, one of the most costly cities in the world to develop or build upon. It also has two additional meanings. First and foremost, you need good value if you plan to construct in New York. Second, every square inch of this island is incredibly important, even the places that at first glance seem unbuildable. This is the location of the American Copper Building. Zoning is another obstacle for developers in New York, aside from cost. Now, the city's profusion of big, crowded structures is exactly what led to the creation of zoning, America's first comprehensive zoning legislation in 1916. This excessive density resulted from the city's development being mostly unregulated prior to zoning restrictions. Zoning regulations changed throughout the ensuing decades to accommodate shifting urban requirements. New York City's land use restrictions are still based on a new zoning resolution that was introduced in 1961. In addition to incentives for open space and mixed-use constructions, the redesign included the idea of floor area ratio, which regulates building density. In essence, zoning controls what can be built and where, how tall spaces can be, whether they are residential, commercial, or retail, and how to balance housing demands, environmental concerns, and economic growth. This returns us to the American Copper website.
My name is Greg Pasquarelli. I am an architect in New York and one of the founding principals of Shop Architects. And on the American Copper Building, it was my project. I led the team along with my partner, Chris Sharpless and Dana Getman. We helped build the buildings, and then I even lived there for 5 years. So I know the building incredibly well.
Let's return to the actual American Copper Building now.
I think what's interesting about the building was that it had gone through a rezoning that allowed for those two towers to be on the site of what was a former power plant. But to go through a rezoning is a very complicated and costly process in New York. What could you do with this really boring plan to make these buildings really stand out?
Instead of creating two towers with shared amenities, the developers were determined to create just one. Even if they had been successful, it would have taken years for them to petition the zoning restrictions. Rather, they approached the architects and requested that they come up with an impractical solution. Greg and his group came up with every concept they could think of. They had an optimistic outlook. We didn't discount any ideas that were too absurd or unrealistic. They came to the conclusion that the buildings may be combined into a single structure by using a bridge. The engineering team prepared for a huge task, and the architects adored it.
I think the engineering team was thrilled. It was like, not something that they get to do every day. And we had found that a bridge between buildings hadn't been done in many decades in New York. So there wasn't even really a lot of the expertise in the city, in the construction industry. And JDS, who built the building as well as developed it, really came up with some inventive ways of getting that bridge built. The approved master plan had a school on the southwest corner and a park on the northeast corner. And then one tower was on the southeast corner and one tower was on the northwest corner. We could get the bridge across, but it couldn't go over the schoolyard because that was not allowed to have something floating over the outdoor space where the children played. So it had to really kind of sneak by there. And then it also, because one building is bending one way and the other building is bending the other way, the bridge is actually not orthogonal. It's a parallelogram that folds in two directions so that it meets the buildings in the correct geometry. So it's even though it's just kind of this little 3-story tube, it's actually a wildly complicated structure.
While the other tower bends on the short axis, the first bends on the long axis. As they approach the Skybridge, each tower's floors get a little closer to one another. Then, as it rises, it bends away from the bridge once more.
And that's what creates this kind of beautiful dance between the two buildings. So it was taking something very banal and very straightforward and pushing it to its limits to making a kind of sublime statement about a tower on a waterfront in a city like New York.
This building could be vulnerable to severe hurricane-level winds and flooding due to its location on the banks of the East River. Nowadays, every building naturally sways a little, and special technical measures are needed to account for this.
So this is a really important thing. Buildings move, and that's how they are safe. and when you're in a building that doesn't move, you're in trouble. So because they're two towers, they could move differentially. And if you had the bridge connected to both buildings, when they move differentially, the bridge would fall apart.
The bridge is actually just attached to one of the towers in order to remedy this. It moves back and forth on enormous Teflon plates on the opposite end.
I've been up there and you can see the building. You don't even feel it, but you can see the buildings slightly moving.
This kind of skybridge is unique and has never been built before. Thus, the building procedure was quite nerve-wracking. Before they could construct scaffolding, they initially constructed a makeshift bridge by tossing ropes between the two structures.
One of the key leaders from JDS was a former Division I college football quarterback. I think he might have thrown the football across to get the first rope so they could start bringing materials back and forth and begin to build the bridge.
They could now relax, knowing that even in hurricane-level gusts, the building would be secure. So, was it really worthwhile to build the bridge? Greg and his colleagues skillfully incorporated many of the two towers' shared features into this building. The notion that every building could have had a very conventional amenities package.
Well, the idea of the Skybridge came from the idea that each building could have had a very standard amenities package like any other building. But if we combined it into one, we could make the single best one in the city. We said, well, why don't we connect it at the closest point and create this incredible place for the community and everyone who lives there to come together. And very quickly we said, well, what program should go on the bridge? And it was very clear it should be the swimming pool, because where else can you swim from one skyscraper to the other 300 feet in the air?
What about flooding? The water table was only 1 meter below the surface, yet foundations were dug 15 meters below the surface before the buildings started to rise in the skyline. In order to prevent the site from flooding while they dug, they built a massive concrete perimeter wall that resembled a bathtub and then pumped the water out. Although it took a whole year and a half to finish, the towers were adequately protected from water because the river simply flooded in and was sent back out.
I think we were pumping 1.5 million gallons of water out of the site every day. Because the river would just sort of pour in and you kind of dump it back out. But yeah, so you had to build a bathtub, and then you build the foundations through there, and then the garage through there, and then you get back up to grade, and then you start the towers.
As it ascended on the skyline, people even thought the buildings were collapsing, so they called firefighters.
We got calls that the fire department and the police were all over the job site, and like I had to get there right away. And everyone was around, and they had the drawings out, and I could hear the firemen saying, "Who would design a building like this that leads over?" And I kind of just stepped away from the crowd and got back in a cab and went.
To ensure emergency responders that it was completely safe, engineers even had to present drawings. The building was covered in copper as a final touch. As you may expect, the building's name comes from the fact that this was the first copper skyscraper facade in New York. It is one of the biggest uses of copper on a high-rise in the world, with approximately 4.25 million pounds of raw copper on its facade. The decision was both practical and aesthetically pleasing. The material would soon acquire a natural patina, progressively changing from its initial reddish color to a deep brown and then to a greenish tone similar to the Statue of Liberty.
I think it was very important to us to have a natural material, and we wanted something that would age and patina gracefully over the decades. And it will turn Statue of Liberty green, but it absolutely gives me a reason to eat healthier, because I would like to live long enough to see the buildings turned completely green.
Because copper is extremely resistant to corrosion and requires little upkeep, the aging process not only improves the building's visual identity, but also ensures durability. The American Copper building has completed the towers, bringing the Skybridge back to New York for the first time in about 80 years. Recently, there has been a global Skybridge renaissance. These buildings may have similar features and mechanical defects, such as the one at the American Copper building. They have the power to expand our cities and forge new relationships. When installed properly, skybridges can potentially strengthen a structure by distributing wind stresses. What about Greg? Now, he has left the towers with his family.
The building was a wild success. People loved it. People loved being there. It was sad to leave. It was. I've got to design another building for me to move into soon. So that's the goal.
As always, folks, please make sure to subscribe to the Definitive Construction video channel if you liked this one. I'll see you in the next one.